So, in this morning's wisdom tale, we learned of a man who was devastated when his story fell to pieces. And I can tell you that as a charter member of River of Grass, I've experienced that same feeling. You see, we had a story. It was a beautiful story. It was held together by our imaginations, which wove a tapestry that included a sprawling green campus of sanctuary and gardens, with room to grow into a spiritual home for every soon-to-be-realized Unitarian Universalist south of Lake Okeechobee.
It wasn't a small story, and we didn't expect it to fall to pieces, but it did. And we picked up those pieces, dusted them off, and put them back together, a little differently time after time, for the story broke often. The story of River of Grass began in the imaginations of a few members of the Unitarian Universalist Church of Fort Lauderdale. You see, Western Broward County was growing quickly at that time. For those of us living here, traveling to the Fort Lauderdale congregation was time-consuming, and so we weren't really able to participate fully in congregational life. The decision of those members was to establish a new UU congregation, the very one whose 25th anniversary we will celebrate next week. The one we chose to name River of Grass Unitarian Universalist Congregation.
We met at first in people's homes and then outside in local parks. Rather quickly, we found a place to meet at the Weston Community Center, where we set up shop each Sunday morning, our original church-in-a-box experience. The UUA sent us Reverend Kenneth Belden, who we fully embraced as our minister. He preached, we organized, we were full of energy and excitement about the possibilities that lay ahead, much as people feel when they hold a newborn baby in their arms and dream of who that baby is and who and what they will become. That is how I remember feeling about our baby, River of Grass. And of course it follows that with so much commitment and positive energy, our membership grew rapidly.
But there were also problems. The kids had to meet in the empty restaurant space, which was a little smelly and didn't have any chairs. And the energy we expanded each Sunday was a lot to carry the clunky keyboard up the stairs to the second floor because there was no elevator. Plus, we had nowhere to meet on any other day other than Sunday mornings. Soon we found and leased a larger 24/7 home, a warehouse space that had been a fire station, where we created a sanctuary and classrooms and offices and grew our membership to over 150. Again, not the perfect solution, though. There was barely enough classroom and meeting space if you counted a classroom meeting in the crawl space behind the chancel, and no playground. This wasn't a permanent solution either, and we were feeling the pinch with our numbers growing so quickly.
Fortunately, a group of dedicated members found a beautiful piece of property in Southwest Ranches. It took a lot of persuading and dedicated advocacy with the town council to change the zoning, but we achieved it. And the property came with a small house that we converted into office and meeting space, and enough land to eventually build a sanctuary and a playground. Our story seemed to be unfolding just as we had planned. We could see in our minds a growing sanctuary and room for our kids to run and play. What an exciting time it was. But then once again, new obstacles arose. We learned that there was a drainage pond on the property which would prevent us from building that home of our dreams. And we lost so many members when our beloved Rev Ken accepted the UUA's offer to start another new congregation in Pennsylvania, nearer his family. This last factor is very common in congregations of all faiths. And all of a sudden, our story that we had held so tightly and so closely was falling to pieces. And after many congregational discussions respecting our fifth principle, we voted as a congregation to sell that property of our dreams.
Fortunately, our timing was just right, and we came out of that sale with a nice nest egg to put toward a future home. Our story was put back together, but now it looked a little different. We began meeting in the cafeteria of Central Park Elementary School. Once again, church in a box, where we finally had a playground for the kiddos and plenty of classrooms for our 80-plus kids. Unfortunately, as often happens, all those difficult challenges and decisions left some too heartbroken to remain members. Our membership numbers and our income were dropping. We started using that nest egg to pay bills, so it too was shrinking. And the economic crisis of 2008 hit. Many members were suffering financial distress.
Fortunately, we are a smart and resilient lot. We became creative, made some very difficult decisions, and had to say goodbye to our second settled minister, Rev. Naomi. We gave up our rental in the elementary school, and for about 9 months, if you can believe it, we worshiped in a tiny preschool called Toddler Tech Academy. Yes, that really was our temporary home for 9 months. But another dedicated group of members found a beautiful space on State Road 84. At the time, it was in use as a guitar store. How appropriate. So we used that guitar store to create a new sanctuary that would be all our own 24/7. We moved into the new sanctuary. Oh, and remember, we said it earlier, River of Grass was completely lay-led for 2 entire years, and then only had part-time professional ministerial support for another 3. Believe me, that was a period of maturation and growth and strengthening of our connections to each other like none other.
At this point, the almost Reverend Amy Carroll Webb was just finishing up her internship at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Boca Raton, and soon found her way to us. What followed were years of deepening connections and expanding programs, vibrant activities like the Cafe Concert Series, our annual Seder, our big fun auction parties, which we're having again this coming Saturday, even bigger and more fun than ever before. Faith development for many children, covenant groups and affinity groups, interfaith outreach to the Jews and Muslims and All People Alliance, social justice work with LifeNet for Families and the Broward Climate Alliance, among others, marches against the death penalty, inhumane detention facilities and gun violence, and advocacy for reproductive rights, LGBTQ+ rights, immigrant rights, and more. We even sent a caravan of women to the Women's March on Washington in our pink hats, knitted by a congregant's mother. Our membership was growing again and again. We were feeling the pinch.
After all, our beautiful sanctuary was not perfect. It felt too small for all our people and multitude of activities. Our kiddos did not have enough classroom space or a playground. The rent was growing and our budget was again becoming very tight. Fortunately, we started a capital campaign, which gave us the ability to realistically believe our own home could be on the horizon. One that did include a sprawling campus for sanctuary and gardens, with room to grow in a spiritual home for very soon to be realized Unitarian Universalists south of Lake Okeechobee. Well, we know what comes next. Our story fell to pieces yet again. A once-in-a-century pandemic of all things uprooted the plan.
Overnight, we switched to Zoom services, learning a totally new way of doing worship and faith development. We started out strong. I remember so well in those times of fear and isolation during the early days of COVID, being with our River of Grass peeps on Sundays via Zoom or in covenant groups who quickly moved to meeting weekly was a true lifeline. Creating music together put us all in little boxes, but we had songs to sing. Many kudos to all who made sure we had amazing Zoom worship services every single week. Our faith development program stayed strong through the creative efforts and tremendous dedication of our amazing teachers. Families met for fellowship every Saturday morning. Faith development classes were held on Sunday afternoons. There was story time with puppets and even mindfulness for kids, all on Zoom. Faith development delivered bags of supplies to all our families each month and even hid eggs in all of our families' yards on Easter morning. During that first year, we continued to thrive while in isolation.
If we learned anything during those stay-at-home times, it's that we are smart and resilient. And yet the COVID years, our Zoom years, evolved from what we imagined might be 1.5 years to 3. The UUA announced that we should all plan to keep our doors closed for a year So in June of 2020, we voted as a congregation to give up our physical space of 9 years, give it up altogether, as it was becoming too expensive and we could not use it anyway. So we put all of our things in storage. And slowly the lack of community and the isolation began to take its toll. Many, especially our kiddos, grew tired of Zoom meetings. Many people began to fill their lives with other activities, moved away from South Florida altogether. Most of us suffered COVID illness at least once, and many of us more than once. Some have long COVID still inflicting their lives. And we lost several beloved members, not to COVID, but gone just the same. And let's face it, many of us just grew used to worshiping on Sunday mornings in our pajamas from home. We forgot how good and necessary and how life-affirming it is to be physically together.
It has been several years now of emotional trauma, not unlike what the rest of society lived through, but especially painful when, as part of our beloved community, we love each other and mourn the loss of our beloved friends so deeply. Still, our story continues. It is precious and it is incomplete. Spirit willing, it will always be incomplete. We need not hold it too close, though, because we have learned that it's not as fragile as we may have once thought, and it is the very challenges we have faced and found ways to overcome that make us the strong congregation we are today at yet another time of new beginnings. My friends, ours is no caravan of despair. We are smart, we are resilient, and we are kind to one another as our story unfolds as it must. When we tell the story of now, when our children tell the story of now, let's hope they remember the fortunate parts and share the wisdom gained from the unfortunate parts.
There are two things I know for sure. First is the tremendous force for good River of Grass has been and is. I hear so often accounts of life-giving sustenance, salvation in the here and now, that River of Grass has given to people suffering indignities and hurts that are oftentimes invisible to the eye, but no less painful than physical ailments and disease. I talk to former members who tell me they remember their time at River of Grass with such love and fondness, in some cases so much so that they have never found another faith community that gives them what River of Grass gave. And I speak to people new to River of Grass all the time who say they felt immediately welcomed and safe when they first walked through our proverbial doors. So I know this community is magic. This congregation is a force for good. And as long as we, its members, continue to tell its story and create its story, River of Grass will survive and thrive. The second thing I know is that this hurting, tortured, and in many ways cruel world, a world that at the same time is full of such promise, this world needs Unitarian Universalist values. And the stronger they are, the more widely they are adopted, the more we can transform ourselves to live them and be them, the better our world will be, and the more we can approach heaven on earth. And that is my short statement of UU faith. Here's another story. Actually, it's a Greek proverb that goes something like this. A society grows when old people, I can relate, when old people plant trees in whose shade they will never sit. Will River of Grass one day be the congregation of 1,000 people we dreamed of in the early days, with all the positive impact that 1,000 people conspiring together will have? Will we one day have that sprawling green campus of sanctuary and gardens, with room to grow into a spiritual home for every soon-to-be-realized Unitarian Universalist south of Lake Okeechobee? It's certainly possible. It's certainly something to long for. It's certainly something to work toward. It's certainly a tree I want to plant and care for as long as I am here.